towards the next orbit is a journey. It's a journey from this orbit to the next orbit. So what does it take in the form of a mindset? What does it take in the form of the businesses? What does it take in the form of processes? And what does it take in the form of practices? So as you move out from this orbit to next orbit, what does the business need to do on all these matters? Mindset, processes, practices, so that they are always not only aligned with the business, with the landscape of business, they anticipate and evolve with that landscape of business. So that's what this story of towards the next orbit is all about. And when we wrote this book with Dr. Singh, Professor Bhandarkar and myself and Dr. Singh, when we came out with this book on role of the board, we had a huge amount of discussion on this. And if I would just say, in the words of Dr. Singh, it required a change, a shift in the mindset. That is from the wealth exploitation to wealth creation, right? It involved enfolding the future into the present. Organizations needed to prepare today in order to prepare for tomorrow, but the time is to do it now. Third was that your vision of growth should no more be through adaptation and consumption, but through continuous innovation. The word over here is continuous innovation, so that you do not sit back on their laurels and go on innovating more and more. So the innovation should not just be in the terms of cost and the quality. Innovation should also be market creating. And there has to be a complementarity between both. The final was in terms of moving away from the conservatism and inertia to creative destruction. Sir always used to say, life begins after death. And that has been his hallmark whenever he had gone to, let's say, lead each and every institute to a different degree of glory. Now, in this journey, in this transition from this orbit to next orbit, what are few weapons? The first weapon, cost and quality leadership. Second weapon, customer centricity. Third weapon, speed. Fourth, time to market. And how do you go about doing it? Only two words. Only two words: globalize, create a global value chain, create a global local delivery, manufacturing and delivery model. That was one. And the second, and this is remarkable because no other time has Schumpeter been exploded so much than now. It was Schumpeter who said that for innovation, you require competition. The pandemic has proved that for innovation, you require collaboration. And I think that has to be the new mantra for each and every corporate now. Now, for all these weapons that you have, you require leadership and governance. That's where it ends. And leadership is all about creating a sense of collectivity, mobilizing that energy, and ensuring that there is a soul of the startup in every organization, however big it may be. Now, we are blessed today that we have 4 CEOs today with us who are next gen. That is, the India of tomorrow rests on their broad shoulders. And luckily for them in a way, I would say, the people whom they are going to govern, whom they are going to lead, are people probably from their own generation, and also the millennials and the centennials. So that intergenerational problem will not be there as far as you're concerned. And the mindset that they can have the mindset of growth. What this new generation has, this generation has a mindset of growth. This generation has a mindset of meaningfulness. This generation has a mind for autonomy. This generation has a mind to experiment, to explore, to fail. And this generation has a mind to learn all the time. So it are these minds that you'll be leading. The format is, I will ask each one of you a question, and I'll give you some time to respond. We originally had been given 5 minutes for each question, but given the shortage of time, I think we can cut it down to 4 minutes. Okay. So may I start with Mr. Malik first, the CEO of Aviva. what do you think is the realities of your emergent landscape of business?
That's a tough one to do in 3 minutes or 4. But let me give it a shot. I think if you look at last 18 to 24 months, there's been a lot of change in an insurance sector, right? We typically follow an AIDA model, which is awareness, interest, desire, and action in an insurance. Let me start by saying life insurance is a push product, right? It's my dream that someday it will be sold off the shelf and we wouldn't have to push it. But till then, it's a push product. It's neither mandated by the regulator nor it's mandated by your parents or your wife to buy a life insurance. No one wakes up one morning and says, let me go buy life insurance today. I wish they did that. So I think what has happened in the last 18 to 24 months is as we've always been trying to expand the insurance penetration in India, which I don't know how many of you know, ranges between 3.5 to 3.69 on a good year or a bad year. That's the only difference that you have. We were always there at awareness and interest. There was some latent desire. I think what COVID has done is it's got the desire element to be fast forwarded, but the action still needs to be taken. And as COVID wanes, the whole willingness to act has been, is coming down. When we look at our business, we look at it from 2 points. One is the existing business and the new business. I'll first talk about the existing business. When we had in last 18 to 24 months, with the macroeconomic slowdown, the economy going down, COVID, uncertainty of people having their jobs, what it led to was, because majority of people see insurance as an investment, not as a protection for the family. They all many of them decided to say, we will not pay the premium. I don't know how many of you read Economic Times last year, same time, which said 35% of the people had not renewed their insurance in COVID. And for us as an insurer, that was the biggest red herring, because we wanted people to renew insurance, because in case, God forbid, something unfortunate happened to them, if they had not paid the last premium, the policy would be in lapse, and it would be far more complicated for us to settle the claims. So I think that was the first challenge that we faced as to how do we get people to, start to pay premiums, and as the world shut down. The second was, how do we then get people to buy insurance in the new mindset? And when I say the new mindset, if you were 35-year-old Indian non-smoker, wanted a 1 crore cover in 2019, you would have, or 2018, you would have roughly got it anywhere between 7,500 to 10,500, depending on what brand, what feature you took. If you wanted that cover last year, you would now have to pay for the same cover 2x. If you've read today's Economic Times, and if you've not bought a protection plan now, in next 2 months, you will have to pay 3x or 4x. Right. And why I say this, that leads me to the reinsurance part of it. While we as insurance companies have treated this as an episodic, this pandemic as an episodic, the reinsurers are treating this as a pandemic that's going to go on. And that's the challenge that has brought to us to be able to offer life insurance at affordable rates, because the reinsurers have got severely impacted globally. And they have then started to pull their hand back and make stringent the treaties that we had with them. So for us to offer an offering to an Indian customer which is viable is becoming a challenge. And I think that's where it stems in. And I think that is where I would leave it to say, as we look to the future, I'm hoping that more people will move from desire to action. I'm also hoping more people will start to look at insurance as protection first and investment second, rather than the other way around, because it is for you and your families. The third shift is people are now starting to see insurance as something that is fulfillment of a life goal, rather than, a death or a family or a cover. And I think that change is for us as an industry, which will take us to the next orbit if we are able to do that. I think that's where I would want to leave it, is when we look at personalization, when we look at people want, he will need that. When we look at personalization, I think it's something in my hands. Okay, sorry. So I think the next orbit, if I just take a minute, will be about hyper personalization, whether it is in pre-sales, service, and that's the challenge that we have. मेरी आवाज वैसे ही बहुत बुलंद है, मैं वैसे ही बोल लेता हूँ, सबको सुनाई देगा. I don't think I need a mic. Let it be. Because we need for recording. Okay. And you're online also. Okay. So I think the last thing is about hyper personalization. I think like everything else, when we talked about generation, the next generation wants a product that is personalized to them. From an insurance company, our challenge is how do you hyper personalize being within the regulated. I think that the whole challenge would be hyper personalized products with hyper personalized pre and post sale service.
you very much. Same question to you, Mr. Madhavan. You were in the business apart from the life insurance business of Aviva. The COVID may have also been some kind of a boon to you. Was it? No, the mic is on. Madhavan, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. I can, Professor Verma. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. Okay. I didn't hear the last bit of your question. If I may request you to repeat it.
Did COVID bring about some possibilities and some opportunities for you, which was not there earlier? And so you are one of those few companies that actually benefited because of this pandemic, if I may say so.
Thank you, Professor Verma, for asking that question. I was sincerely hoping somebody would ask that question, before the session gets over today. And I have a very straight and direct answer for you. But before that, thank you for having me on the panel. It's a pleasure and honor to be there, and with all my esteemed fellow panelists as well. And just to give a quick background, I work for a company called Boston Scientific. Might not be as famous as an Aviva or a Mahindra. So let me quickly introduce the company. It is one of the largest medical devices manufacturers in the world. We are present in over 120 countries, and the most of the products that we offer, I don't want to get into the technical details, but these are literally life-saving products. Think about heart failures, think about valvular diseases, strokes, or severe gastrointestinal blocks or kidney diseases. Pretty much all over the body, like we have products which either get implanted or are used to treat diseases, right? And these are very high-end technology diseases. And in most of these procedures, some of our employees need to assist the physicians in completing the procedure. So that's a very big background of the company that I work for. Innovation is very hard, very close to the heart for Boston Scientific. We spend more than $1 billion globally on R&D, organic R&D every year. So it is very close to our heart. And back to your question, Professor Verma, like whenever I go, wherever I've been in any of the limited social interactions in person over the last couple of years, people think, oh, healthcare. So you must be having a great time, right? Unfortunately, that's not the case. So in healthcare, when COVID happened, to keep things simple, there are broadly two kinds of procedures that happen. One is elective procedures. So if I have, like a cosmetic surgery, right? Like it's not that I need to get my cosmetic surgery done today. I can wait for 6 months, 12 months, or, I can put it off. And there is something called non-elective procedures where you have a heart attack, you don't think, or should I be going to the hospital or not? You better rush, otherwise you'll be dead. So most of the products, in fact, almost all the products that Boston Scientific deals with are non-elective procedures. Though they're very, high impact products, like these are procedures which can still wait for a finite period of time. You can push it out by 6 months, 12 months. Like if I have a nagging pain in the leg, I wouldn't rush to a hospital when I know there is COVID out there. We didn't have vaccines till until, like last year. So people were actually pushing out the treatment, right? And there are studies which show that maybe an equal number or probably more number of people died due to non-COVID related complications than COVID because people were not getting care on time. So though you feel that a pain in the leg is not severe, it can lead to a very severe disease where you can pretty much get a major hemorrhage and you can die. But people don't realize that, right? And those are the patients that Boston Scientific deals with. So back to your question, we didn't have a great time, Professor Verma. Last year was horrible in terms of everything, and not just purely from the revenue part, right? It was this miserable feeling that we knew patients were dying. We knew that we couldn't get supplies in on time because of global supply chain challenges. We knew we are going behind on product launches because of a bunch of issues. We knew that our employees and our employee safety comes first. We highly, in fact, beyond a point, we just told them flat, don't step out of your home. We do understand you need to be there for cases, but your safety is important, so don't step that. So it was a very, very complex last 18, 24 months where you had to make sure you live up to what you're supposed to do by being part of the medical devices, right? Make sure products reach the hospitals and patients on time. You need to live up to the customer centricity that you just talked about, Professor Verma, where doctors expect employees from Boston Scientific to turn up for procedures when they need their assistance. And we also need to live up to the global challenges that COVID in general presented, right? Manufacturing delays, supply chain delays, and all that stuff. And in all of that, obviously, to make sure the employees are, or the Boston Scientific family is well knit, we looked out for each other, and the purpose came to the forefront. So it was a very complex time, but very happy to share that despite all this, the warehouse of Boston Scientific didn't shut for a single day during COVID. Very proud to say that, right? And our warehouse is in Delhi, by the way. So despite the first wave, second wave, we didn't shut the warehouse for a single day. There were employees of Boston Scientific in full PPEs going to support cases of non-COVID patients as well. So that was again fantastic. And despite the humongous cost of supply chain, we managed that, the products and whatever had to reach India, and, we had a bunch of other innovative stuff which we did. We took care of that. And to your the last point, I would like to say why COVID was, in a way, probably not the best way to say it was good for us, is that we really expedited a lot of innovation, because typically innovation medical devices is the quality of products or the kind of products. We looked at product delivery, we looked at remote proctoring or remote support of cases, the technologies that we kind of brought in. I think those were the good parts. And this year, happy to say that this is probably one of the best years Boston Scientific had in India, despite all the challenges, right? And it's based on all the innovations we have done over the last, a couple of years. So I'm sure I'll get more time to talk about it, but I guess that's a high overview of, the answer. So it wasn't a very good year for everybody in healthcare, Professor Verma. And that's what the people think, but that's not the case. Back to you.
But wonderful listening to you, Mr. Madhavan. You see, we always believe now that COVID has been a great leveler. And seeing it as a problem is passe. I think it's one has to see it in terms of opportunities. And I'm so glad that you mentioned about the way you took advantage of the opportunity that was also there, impregnant in the same COVID, which was a huge problem for everybody. So fantastic. May I now talk to Mr. Pandey, who was over here, somebody who drove sales during this time. So how did the realities, what are the major realities that you faced, COVID and post-COVID?
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Verma, and thank you everyone for having me. The first point I would like to mention is that the pandemic that we've experienced in the last 18 months is actually going to be an endemic situation for us going forward. So there would be wave after wave, not just of this pandemic. And therefore, from that lens, working during the pandemic has taught us, at least us, quite a few lessons. And I'll put it in a context of a larger framework, if I may. Generally we have a tendency of equating change with innovation, or the other way around. We say innovation is about change, or we say if changes are happening fast, there must be something at the base of it, which is innovation. And we've traditionally looked at innovation from the lens of cost, quality, new process, et cetera, et cetera. What the COVID has done is that it has brought out fundamental disruption as a reality, where industries have started collapsing into each other. And I think that is one legacy of the pandemic that will outlive this pandemic and go into newer ones. So let me give you an example from my industry. So I'm in an auto space, so one can look at me as a auto seller, selling used vehicles, buying and selling used vehicles. So my industry was very different from a traditional e-commerce industry, which I used to work earlier, where the whole idea is about trying to make purchasing easier and easier to consumer, a one touch. So that's another business. The third is a technology business, which argues that I'm not at the periphery, I'm the center of the business, right? In a way, say how Boston Scientific treats their medical devices as a center of the operation, or maybe say IBM treats technology at the core of its operation. Now, earlier, what used to happen is for us, auto was our core business, and technology was a great enabler. And we used to kind of build e-commerce as a wave that will come into the future. What happened during this pandemic is all three collapsed into it within a matter of weeks. So consumers no longer went outside, but they still wanted cars. They couldn't afford, new cars. They wanted something which was tried, tested, but used. But they couldn't buy a used car without touching and feeling, right? Because it's used by someone else. Now, just imagine how that scenario would pan out. It was a time of immense potential for us. Absolutely. I mean, I have no shame in saying that while in terms of human loss, COVID has been without parallel in history in terms of pandemic. I think in terms of businesses, specifically technology-oriented businesses like us, it's just put us into another orbit, right? So if you look at how the businesses have panned out, at least in my space, what we've seen, more and more consumers, more than 90% of consumers now decide what they want to buy online. They may not complete the transaction there. They don't complete the transaction there, but they have started using that, much as generations before us started using WhatsApp. Suddenly they discovered what WhatsApp could do. This is what this generation and this pandemic has made e-commerce bring it to the forefront. The second is people said, oh, wait, if I go out, I risk my health. Is there a technology way in which you can give me an assurance that this product is worth buying, even though it might have been used by someone else? And therefore, I think what this has done is, for us, it is, it could very easily have been a perfect storm of we don't know what to do. Consumers, we are all at peace, all in pieces. But I think what it has done is it has given this industry a completely new orbit. And I'm happy to say, I completely second your fact that, I mean, we've grown roughly 2 times since the beginning of pandemic. And the only thing that stops that momentum of growth is our capacity to imagine the future.
Fantastic. My same question to Mr. Jha, who is in Pepsi, much more kind of FMCG, probably must have been the most badly hit. How did you cope with the reality? What was the reality that you faced at that point of time, Mr. Jha?
So before I answer that question, if you allow me, I'll take a minute to talk about the man whose birthday we are celebrating, Dr. Preetham Singh.
Absolutely.
I had the great fortune of being a student long years back at IIM Lucknow. And I can proudly say that I also was among his most favorite students in my batch. And everyone, and I'm sure there are lots of people in the room, but everyone has a favorite Preetham Singh story. I have 3 I thought of. So first of all, we just wanted, this is year 2000, we wanted to bring in a couple of CEOs to our campus. Lucknow was a very young campus. We were the 14th batch, and we had to build some sort of a reputation after A, B, and C. And we went to him. We need your help calling a couple of CEOs and want to create a CEO platform like today. And he said, "Do kyun karna hai? Let's call 20." So the first, always pushing people to think big. And then he supported us, and we finally got 60 CEOs among the finest, most reputed CEOs of those times in India. So that ability to push and inspire, that's something I remember. Second thing, we were going through our placement just before day 0 and day 1, as most of you are B school professors, you will remember, kids have really traumatic time, right? This is just, this is the culmination of their 2 years, expectations of parents, everybody, each other, peer pressure. He was the one teacher that I remember from then who would come around every evening, past midnight, just to check on the students. And even if, for the last student on the campus, it's all right, we'll take care of you. Don't worry, do your best tomorrow. So supporting in adversity, that's something, other thing I remember from him. And the third one I remember was when we finally did the event that I talked about, he said, some of you go to Delhi, and we took the Lucknow mail and reached Delhi and invite Dr. Ishwar Dayal, who was the founding director of IIM Lucknow. And he said, Guru se badkar kuch nahi. And many of you, some lady was talking about Guru and teacher in reference to Dr. Singh. Just thinking about this, the respect to your elders, people who teach you stuff. These are 3 things I will carry with me for life. And I see his trademark hat and his trademark smile just behind Ashutosh. So, I'm so delighted, and it's a personal privilege to be here today with all of you. Now to come to the question. So here is what I do before I answer the question. So I run PepsiCo's technology and business services centers around the world. So I have centers from China to Mexico, in between in Egypt, Poland, Russia, and India, and many other countries. So my response will not just focus on India, but also on what we are seeing globally. So of course, in the industry, we have seen suddenly supply chain stoppage. We saw consumers' inability to reach our product. We saw commodity prices, going up, and we also saw access to our consumer and customers stopping. Of course, these are challenges and huge challenges, and nothing prepared us for that. But the biggest challenge, and you talked about some weapons, I think the one that we miss and which our traditional education system has missed, the biggest weapon that I think now that's in our arsenal if we manage it properly, and is becoming our challenge if we don't manage it properly, is talent. If one thing pandemic has taught us is those who had access to great talent and those who were able to leverage that great talent dramatically leapfrog those who did not. So the example we heard from Mahindra and the example we heard from Boston Scientific, and also the future example we are hearing from Aviva, in my mind, it's all about talent. And the future is about talent. Talent comes first. Your employees come first. Everything comes second. So for me, and in the industry that we are in, we have seen the dramatic coming to the fore of the importance of talent and people. When pandemic hit, almost the entire population, got clustered inside our own homes. Only a few brave soldiers went out, and those were our healthcare workers, those were our people on the street protecting us, and those were our salespeople in every industry. They didn't stay back at home thinking about themselves and their families. They went out and took care of the market, our consumers, our customers, our stakeholders. And I think that is the passion that the winning organizations displayed. So for me, it's all about talent.
Right, great words. Moving on to the second question that I have for all of you. I think just to close this on Mr. Jha, Dr. Preetham Singh always used to say that eventually it is the people power that will lead the business. And it is the leader's job to mobilize that energy of the people. So that's the kind of regression that he always used to mention, and we are so grateful to him for the kind of learning that he gave to us. And by the way, even in MDI, in IMI, what Dr. Preetham Singh used to do at IIM Lucknow, he repeated that. Subir is standing over here. I think he would remember the way he would go around the hostel talking to the students, basically motivating them and putting a hand that, look, he's there. I think that was one of the reasons why he galvanized all of us. So it's tribute to the man. My second question is, well, given the new possibilities, given the fact that the world got flattened for some time, given the fact there were some new opportunities, new ways of doing things you may have discovered, what were some of the changes that you did in your business model or business processes to bring about a change in the outcome? And also change the fate that COVID would have inflicted upon you.
So you want me to start? Okay. Yeah. I think for us, when the world, and as I said, last year, March, the world just came to a standstill. In my own organization, when I was leading operations before my current role, I would always challenge and say, why could we not do a month end from home? And everyone told me there's regulation, there's underwriting, there is this, there is that, there is customer data. We cannot do a closing from home. You can't close a month at home. Right. And I always used to say that we should be able to do it someday. I think for me personally, the happiest thing was when it closed. I said, okay, so we have March closing. If you know insurance, 40% of our business gets done in January, February, March. March is the Christmas month or Diwali month for us. And I said, let's do closing from home. And the regulator, the regulations, everything just came together to make sure that you could close from home. And from that day onwards, that's one thing internally that we decided how we will do it. But I think more important is the customer standpoint. That's the time when we realized that there is a difference between having a tool and usage of a tool. When we communicated to the customers that we have tools that will enable you for us to service you from the confines of your home or safety of your drawing room or your bedroom, we realized that having a tool is one thing, but there is a big chasm between having a tool and helping the customer who's used to coming to your branch and give you a check and say, please renew my insurance premium, to be able to use it. That was a gap that we started to then do from a customer standpoint. How do you get customers to use the NEFT, the credit card, the debit card, the Paytm, the UPI options to service? How do you get them to use the customer portal to service? That was first. The second challenge that we had to internally quickly recalibrate was, we have a sales force who believes in touch and feel and then sales, right? There is a lot of trust that happens when you see an insurance advisor or an insurance person coming into your house and selling you insurance. That's, but the challenge was they couldn't go to home. That was an external challenge. The internal challenge was, how do we upgrade our sales force to do consultative selling and closure of sales virtually on a video call? They themselves were not used to being able to do that closure on a video call or a virtual call. That was the second challenge that we faced as to how do we equip that. And we had to do that training also virtually now. So I think that was the second thing. The third piece of that whole challenge that we looked at from the standpoint was, as you start to, as the world started to open up, how do you then start getting back to the whole rhythm of where the hybrid comes in? How do you then start to balance out between the customer need, the employee safety, right? And the regulatory need of being able to service. How do you get that mindset? Because, when we opened, we were one of the first industries to open up. And when we opened up in May, June last year, the world was still very wary of stepping outside their house. And we were expected to come to the office, open up our offices, get employees to come in, and start to say that the world. And that was also the regulatory ask, by the way, of saying we must open up the centers. And I think those were the couple of challenges that we faced from that standpoint as to how do we build that. The other was, even from a business process, if you look at it, we are an industry where we want you to go to a medical center. We need to have medical because that's the underwriting requirements that we have. We are taking the risk on your behalf. How do we make sure that the risk it's the right risk? Because we are going to rate on the risk and you're going to pay a premium basis that risk. We also have to have that risk from a claim standpoint later on. So it was both the customer need and the business need, because our business model depends on how we rate the risk that we are going to sign off. How do we give that comfort and what practices did we do? So we actually started to do video medical examinations and record by our underwriting teams, right? The other was, when we wanted you to walk into a medical center, we had to be first sure that as a customer, you would be safe. We sent videos of the medical centers that we had to say, this is how our medical centers are. This is how it looks like. This is where we want you to go. These are the COVID protocols that we would follow. The customers were learning. We were learning. They were in dark about certain aspects of COVID. We were in dark about certain aspects of COVID. And it also became our responsibility of how do we sift that information both for our customers and our employees. At one point, there was this big scare, COVID now transfers through air. Or COVID, 90% of COVID happens through touch, which is now come down to 15%. So it was our responsibility. How do we sift that information and then tell our customer this is the right information? And we were challenged on that stuff. So I could go on and on, but I think those were the key ones. I'll summarize and leave it.
Great. What about you, Mr. Pandey? Changes in business model, something that you treat so far, process of concern, application of technology.
Yeah. So, fortunately, we are a small company, not in the league of PepsiCo or Aviva or even Boston Scientific. So we had the opportunity of doing something more fundamental, right? I would just mention 3 parts, and I'll take a cue from what Priyaranjan was saying, which I think on talent, which is quite important. The first thing that we actually tried to kind of imbibe in ourselves is a changed mindset. Essentially, the fact that business is not, and in fact, Amit was reflecting on that as well, that the business is no longer a uni-modal or a uni-channel model, right? And that everything has gotten disrupted. So we very quickly adopted what we now called a phygital, physical, digital kind of a model. And, that actually is easy to say, but when you try and craft it into individual pieces, the customer journey becomes very complicated, as I hope in your case as well, right? And what exact combination of physical touch and the digital touch is actually something which is specific to every industry, and more importantly, specific to every organization within that industry. Because I think that piece is actually a trial in action. I mean, you cannot say I've arrived at it and therefore I'll do it that way. So I think that's one piece which we very quickly understood, and we very quickly adapted to, with the fact that when the pandemic started, 100% of our business used to happen offline, in a way. Offline as in a touch point, always on tech, but always offline. At the moment, more than 60% of my business is done digitally. Very little of the business is done physically, right? And that combination is different for me than other people in my industry. So that's point number one. Point number two, I think from a business model perspective, personally, one of the big realizations for me, an epiphany moment over the last 18 months, has been that, over the last 20 years of my career, we have heard about customer insight being at the center of business model. I personally think it's a bit overrated, and I'll try and explain why I say so. My view is that customer insight is a necessary but not a sufficient condition, because we have reached a stage of technology evolution and a lot of things mixing around that one needs to actually prompt the consumer to adopt it. Not just consumers, as Amit mentioned, even the regulators. For instance, in his industry, telehealth has been going around for the last 30 years, right? It's only during this pandemic that the regulators kind of opened up that there was a way to deliver telehealth, right? Likewise, many industries, a Zoom call. I mean, we are talking about Zoom, right? The fact that there could be a hybrid meeting, right, and a hybrid conference successfully with people from other places, and it was actually not even. I mean, I'm not sure whether, Professor, you had a hybrid meeting before the pandemic. That's no. Which panelist or which consumer in the boardroom or which someone told you, look, I'm happy with the plan? Because consumers don't understand beyond a point. So I think what has happened is what it has enabled us to actually, if I may use the word, throw our existing business model into the dustbin and create a new business model. Now, we are not Pepsi, so we don't have a 100-year-old history. We are a small, microcosm within the larger Mahindra group. So we have that flexibility. And I think when I speak for a lot of, startups in this country, a lot of startups have done that. They've just flipped the business model. And I think that business model flipping has enabled us to move from a seller of a particular merchandise to becoming a platform where we are now saying we'll organize the ecosystem rather than try and be a buyer and a seller of a particular merchandise. So that's point number two. The point number three on talent, and that's what Priyaranjan mentioned. Personally, I think while I completely endorse the point that talent is the kind of differentiating advantage in the future, I would I would like to nuance it by saying that it's just not talent. The day is not far where technology will make 95% of your decisions. If you know trading, 99% of decisions in trading is made by a machine. So machines are in the center, people are at the periphery. That's very disconcerting for people, general people, to even believe, because we are supposed to be the center of this whole existence, right? But that is a reality that one needs to come to. That there will be definitely a need for leadership and talent and people who will do it, but don't underestimate the huge power unleashed by the pandemic of data, of artificial intelligence, of machine learning. These are not esoteric concepts. These are, as we said, as I'm speaking, Zoom is hearing me, and tomorrow morning Zoom will send me or even in another 5 minutes, they will send me a notification saying, oh, I thought you were addressing a leadership conference and here is something that you can do. And believe me, it's just the tip of the iceberg. So I think the whole talent tech kind of marriage, which someday will become, cyborgs or whatever you call it, I think that has begun with the pandemic.
I think these are some amazing moments in which all of us are living. because AI has also the potential of, I would say, driving more inequality in the world. That's one thought that is already there, apart from the fact that it's augmenting human energies to deliver things in a much better manner. Listening to you, what I also thought was the concept of fast moving and fast failing, and the usage of a lead user technology by a lot of firms that is getting into business right now, making people do the things, creating an ecosystem so that they do it, failing there, and then learning and coming back again. So that way the business has been moving forward. Mr. Jha, what do you have to say now with regard to the business processes? How did you realign your logistics? How do you realign your last mile delivery?
So last mile delivery is just one part of it, very important, but one part of it. It's about fundamentally reinventing how you access your consumer. And like Ashutosh was saying earlier, consumer insights is a different game now. It isn't about what the consumer is telling you what they need. It's based on technology, based on the reality, and based on the changed market context, your ability to predict what they will need in the future. And so the kind of innovation, the kind of new products, the kind of access, I mean, PepsiCo, for example, was mostly a B2C organization. Most of our consumers went to big supermarkets, to the corner kirana shop to buy our products. And we didn't have too much of an online presence. But then suddenly, out of the blue, one day, all malls closed, all movie halls closed, all shops closed, all travel closed. But your consumers still want your product because they love them. So how do you reach them if you don't have access to them? So that's the big transformation we went through, and something that would have taken years in a large organization like PepsiCo basically happened in a matter of weeks. And our team in Hyderabad, for example, developed the whole end-to-end process to deliver direct-to-consumer solutions in the US in a matter of 3 weeks, something that would have taken 3 years in the past life. And this they did while all of them were working from home. And that's the potential of the human element that has been unleashed by the pandemic. The other part is our talent pool. And again, I am really passionate about this because I strongly believe that it's already happening, and it'll happen more and more, that humans will only do what only humans can do. Everything else machines will do. And what are the only things that only humans can do? Empathy, care, trust, emotions. And those are the kind of things we have seen play big time in the last year and a half. Today, our talent pool is not limited to one city or one state or one country or one continent. The talent pool is global. For several years, and those of us who are in the business services /IT/technology industry will know. Everyone used to say till 2 years back, okay, for this role, this person has to sit next to me for them to be effective. If I'm the director of Nirma Institute of Management, I need my core group of professors right next to me to drive innovation. But then suddenly all your professors started operating from Himachal and Kanyakumari and Timbuktu for all you care, and the quality of outcomes actually went up. So the talent pool is no longer local, talent pool is global. And today when we drive innovation in our enterprise, it doesn't matter where the idea came from, USA or India or Africa or Finland or wherever. A great idea has access today, which wasn't the case 18, 20 months back. So that's the second thing I would definitely want to say, the globalization of the talent pool. And the third thing is, the kind of leaders we need in a situation like that. I mean, with all due respect, our academic system and the professional system has taught us about certain levels of types of leadership. But in March 2020, none of them was relevant. And I saw very successful, amazing track record leaders completely caught with big light in their eyes, just like deer on a street in the jungle. But leaders who had imagination, leaders who had courage, and leaders who had authenticity, these are the kind of leaders who helped us tide over this problem. And these are unfortunately the things that we don't learn in business school or any other school. So we have to now teach people imagination, because whatever you have learned in the past is irrelevant in the future. So you have to imagine. You have to go to a destination, or you have to take your organization to a destination that you don't see today. So you have to imagine it. You have to have the courage to make mistakes. All of us will make mistakes. Now the offices are going to open up in our industry, roughly 3 million people. Of course, we'll make mistakes. We don't know what will happen. They talk about various different kind of things. But the leader has to have the courage to take a decision and then live with the consequences. And the third one is leader has to be authentic. That's the third thing we have realized. The leader doesn't anymore have to be, alpha male who knows everything, who doesn't cry, who always shoulders, and it's normally the alpha male in the stereotype. Today, the leader is empathetic. Leader is more balanced. The leader is more authentic. Leader is okay with failing. Leader accepts that, I have the humility to say I screwed up. So I think these are the kind of learnings we have learned in the last 2 years, Professor Verma.
Fantastic. I think great words. I would say how a leader can ennoble others while morally uplifting himself. So leaders need to continuously evolve, at the same time ennoble those who are around them and with them. That brings me to Mr. Madhavan. What about your organization, sir? How are you using digital? How are you using data? How are you using your supply chains in order to ensure that things are delivered on time, especially after the fact that once the COVID has opened up, has come down, a lot of people who had earlier postponed their elective surgery or whatever procedures will now be going en masse for it, including me. All right. So
thank you. Thank you, Professor Verma, and great conversations with my fellow panelists. Thoroughly enjoying this session here. So talking about digital, 2 years back, and I've been in this industry for a little bit, and 2 years back, if someone came to me and said that, hey, if you want to launch a product, why don't we do like a remote launch with a surgeon sitting in the US trying to teach a surgeon in India how to implant a product, I would have laughed off, right? I would like, come on, so don't kid anymore. And literally, I can tell you with a lot of confidence, that's what anybody in the medical industry would have told you. But come, March 2020, and we knew that borders were shut. And again, today we are a lot better placed. Today we're seeing pretty much India opened up, people traveling everywhere. It's pretty much back to, business as usual for, I guess, most of us. But a year back, we didn't have any medicines reliable, treatment modalities. The vaccine was nowhere in the horizon. It was as chaotic as it could get, right? And as I mentioned, Professor Verma, we are in the life-saving business, right? Though we are not the doctors or the nurses, and we are very clear, we don't want to be kind of put in the same group with them. They do, a much better and more critical job. We still play a little bit role in the entire healthcare ecosystem. So we had a lot of product launches, important product launches, which we had to put off because obviously people couldn't travel. We had a lot of procedures which had to be postponed because our guys were kind of stuck up. Even if they wanted to, they just couldn't leave their homes because of all the blockades and the sudden lockdowns and all that stuff. But that was like a year and a half back, right? Very proud to say that India was the first country in Boston Scientific, at least on this side of the world, where we launched a product, and this is an implant. This is a penile, implant for erectile dysfunction. I still can't believe we actually pulled it off. So there was a surgeon sitting in the US with his special glasses, using virtual reality, augmented reality, trying to see what the surgeon in Delhi was seeing, and guiding the person to the procedure. It was a couple of hours procedure, successfully done, and we went on to do that across multiple cities, not just the Delhi or Bombay, but again multiple cities, tier 2, tier 3. And we really, invested last year to kind of come up with the technology interface, the plans to kind of see how we can make this possible. We would have easily saved 4 or 5 years, I would say, in the digital transformation piece as far as such technology is concerned. So that was one part of it, right? So how can genuinely digital be? It is not just Zoom meetings anymore, right? We are talking about very, very different things. We're talking about and recently in Japan, there was a remote proctoring of a heart valve case. Now, this is literally life and death, right? And that was, again, possible because of technology. So technology has enabled us to kind of speed up, the launch of products, speed to market for innovation. And this would continue, again, 2 years later, even if COVID wouldn't be there. I don't see what is a point in kind of flying in a surgeon all the way from the US. The gentleman wastes 3-4 hours of his time, 3-4 days of his time to just to get here and go back. So that was one fundamental shift. Second thing is, again, a lot of points Priyaranjan made totally resonated with me, right? See, we are in the business of healthcare. We are a high touch point business. It is all about people and talent. And sometimes as leaders, we don't call that out often enough, and we don't call that out as candidly as possible, right? Sometimes it's assumed, oh, talent is a good thing to have on the slide. Anything to do with talent management is great to talk about, but we don't probably live to it or talk often about it. And the last year things changed dramatically, right? It was like an ethical dilemma where I had my employees, trained technicians who need to go out into the field to support cases, but at the same time, going out can also mean risking your own life, your livelihood, and your family. And it was a point where somebody had to, as Priyaranjan mentioned, stand up and say, take the hit on it and say, hey, this is what we will do, right? And we just stood up and said, employee first. We do understand what we can, make in, what we can do in the field, but if you guys go out and if you don't come back, what's the point, right? Like it's like a in a way it was a kind of a no-brainer to me, but it was still a very how I would say, like a bold thing to kind of just stand up and say that, hey, employee first, stay at home, we'll deal with it. However, if you still really want to support, let's figure out how we can do that, without exposing yourself, right? And that really pushed us drive the digital innovation. As of today, I can say with a lot of pride that almost 60% of a lot of cases which we normally go in person to support, we can do that remotely. We've had developed technologies. We have partnered with some amazing digital companies which we never used to look at to figure out how we can kind of do that, right? And the last bit, again, people who have been in this industry stay put for a fair long time because of the purpose, and that really binds us. Some of our employees were kind of adamant beyond a point, right? They were like, no, I need to go. I need to know that the patient is safe and I need to go there. Then how did you quickly adapt, right? Like sometimes you have all these HR policies and global policies, but how do you quickly adapt? So we figured out a way that, hey, you go to a procedure, you don't come back home. We identified hotels, we tied up with hotels where you just go back, quarantine yourself for 7 days, 14 days, make sure you're fine before you come back. And I can keep going on with the kind of initiatives that we developed to protect employees. So employees was the center, and the purpose of serving patients was the center of everything. We got like the 8th rank in the great places to work in, this is across industries, right? In the great places to work last year during the COVID year, purely because of all these wonderful things. I know we are short on time and I can keep going, Professor Verma, but 2 things: digital transformation, how it can really help us serve patients without exposing our employees, and talent, I still believe, is everything, right? Like technology does play a critical role, but the way I look at it is that you get good talent, they'll take care of the technology with themselves, right? So you still need good people on board, completely switched on, completely, tightly knit around the purpose that we are living as an organization, and then magic happens. And when COVID paused a little bit this year, the team went out with a vengeance. We literally went out with a vengeance because they felt that, okay, now it's the time we need to kind of really go out there, take care of the company, take care of our patients. And as I said, this year probably is the best year we had, for a very long time, despite COVID completely not being out. So those are a couple of points, Professor Verma, back to you.
Wonderful. I love this debate between talent and technology, AI versus human. I think that's a lovely debate that's going on for quite some time, and I think we're going to hear a lot on this. My last set of questions.
Dr. Verma?
Each one of you. Yes.
This is the new reality, so people will interject virtually. I don't think there is a conflict or a debate. I think it's the yin and yang. So it's one without the other is not adequate. And there is no primacy. I mean, at least from my perspective, it's both.
It has to augment. I mean, the whole idea about AI is that it has to augment the human intelligence, not the other way around.
I second that as well. Totally second that as well. I don't think there's a conflict. And again, different industries, different stages of evolution. Again, we'll all be moving differently, but I guess there's no fundamental conflict. Sorry, Professor.
Ashutosh, would like to say something over there? That's your thing.
Well, I think I don't have any fundamental disconnect with it, but I think it is a bit wishful because I think more and more machines will take over our lives. If you don't believe, you should time yourself for the next 20 minutes to see how many times you look at your machine or type in the text while you're doing something else.
I just want to say, while I agree with Ashutosh that the machines will take over, but we have to be very, very, very cognizant that they are very poor masters. It's about reiteration of data, and what gets into them gets out. So if we are not careful of what the input is from an AI and an ML standpoint, the output is going to be something that will mislead all of us. So we have to be very, very careful before we give them that.
Probably
role.
we need to have one more badminton Casper over in deep blue.
If you don't mind just let me put in a word. I think, Amit, I think that boat has already sailed, right? If you look at genetic engineering, and I think the point that, the kind of data, say a company like 23andMe has today, has the power to actually, and the kind of tools we have, and for which, last year, the Nobel Prize was awarded, and which is probably the basis of this COVID, thing. Any technology in the world has been double-sided. And the moment data comes in, you can kiss some of these high morals goodbye. The only thing that you can do, maybe, is to make sure that the so-called ethical AI or talent and et cetera, can contain it like we have been able to contain nuclear, fission and fusion for the last 70 years. Just a point. I mean, this debate isn't settled.
Well, that was very good in a way. But can we say that for things that is repetitive and routine, machines are going to take over, things that are standardized, but things that require human ingenuity, compassion, resilience, and I think that's where the human and the creation of that process, that's where the human mind still probably will have a great role to play.
No, let me interrupt. No, have you ever asked Alexa saying, Alexa, I want to be loved? You'd be amazed at the response you'd get.
Absolutely.
Or Alexa, I'm feeling
But
lonely.
Alexa has been programmed to say that,
But it's also about the number of questions. So if you tell Alexa, Alexa, I want love, you'll be surprised at what Alexa responds to you. Or Alexa, I'm feeling lonely. You'll be surprised at what Alexa responds to you.
Did you ask these questions to Alexa, by the way?
And what if Alexa says, look, I'm programmed to love only blue-eyed boys?
Ask Alexa, मुझसे शादी करोगी?
See, there you are.
That was the safest. Alexa.
That's a different type of problem to solve, I think.
All right. Well,
thing would be that now if you downloaded this person's voice, what would Alexa say? Because when a woman asks you, that's a difference.
well, last question to all of you. Look, this is also a program on governance, a theme on governance, and all of you are CEOs. And Dr. Singh always used to say that fish rots from the head, right? Secondly, whenever we talked in terms of continuous innovation, it was all about a choice which the CEOs had to do, whether should they look at the current revenue or should they look at the future revenue, and therefore put money in something that might fail tomorrow. So in terms of the certain new things that is coming up, but which I think is a repetition of what Dr. Singh always used to talk about, the notion of trusteeship as the basis of governance. That has taken the form of what is called stakeholder capitalism. From each one of you, I'm asking this specific question: how are you? What are the governance? How are you engaging with your multiple stakeholders?
I think let's start with Ashutosh and do it differently this time.
Okay, Ashutosh.
Yeah.
Start with you now.
So I think governance is certainly a most critical part now, given that there is a multiplicity of stakeholders, right, all around, and those stakeholders are regulatory body, own organization, etc. But more importantly, from a governance standpoint, I think what is now becoming really big is what framework should one evolve to allow organizations, which some of our panelists have said, is allow organizations to be able, to fail fast. Let's put it that way, that the point is that was made. If I look at it, I think the governance framework, and I think that's something that Dr. Preetham Singh used to kind of say earlier as well. I think we have somehow compartmentalized leadership and management, right? Actually, these are not two things. There is not a typical leader archetype, an alpha male or someone, any typical template, right? The guy who manages every day, also sets out a vision for the future, right? And in that sense,
that guy, because today is such an uncertain world, chances are that he will fail or she will fail. So, the difference between the governance framework of past, which had compliance, which had good things to do, which had a lot of stakeholders to balance, and which kind of tried to kind of do the best for everyone in some sort of a way. Today, that is shifting to how do you manage issues where the folks who are about to kind of who are responsible for that governance framework are by themselves, not going to be around for a long time. That's a very, very difficult thing. In fact, in organizations where there's been a lot of churn in leadership, that is probably one of the biggest things to kind of attack, right? And my sense is that I think that requires a change in the way governance is actually understood and implemented post in the pandemic world, because we have multiple stakeholders, and today there is no way you can manage expectations of all of them. And I'm being brutally candid, and the fact that if you look at it, a leader has a limited shelf life today than he used to be in the past. In a particular organizational context, at least, you need a far bigger role of the organization and a slightly dwarfish role of the leader for the governance to be paramount. And you have to disengage governance from compliance, which is where the whole, for some reason, people tend to kind of use that interchangeably. Compliance is one thing that has to continue to go on. But governance is about looking at the future, not sitting and approving my CSR budgets or trying to see whether the secretarial processes are being followed and all. I mean, that's a very archaic concept of governance.
All right, let me build on what Ashutosh said. I think I'm audible. I'll just take it because I'm in an industry where it resonates with me to say, how do you differentiate governance between compliance, right? We are a highly regulated industry, and we have a certain norms that the regulator expects us to do. I think there are two things that happen in a governance or the futuristic standpoint. One is, it's all about the culture. It's all about, whether we talk about failing fast, whether we talk about talent, whether we talk about empowering people, whether we talk about delegation. It is what culture are we building in the organization where people are able to differentiate between what is compliance, what you have to do, whether it's the risk framework, the regulatory framework, and where is the gray area of governance where you start to take a call and say, can I do this? Can I not do this? How will this be looked? If it is successful, how will this be looked? If it is not successful, more importantly, how will this be looked? Because then the questions will be asked, saying, why did you do it? Or who authorized you to do it? I think that's the culture piece. That tone is set at the top. And when we had this, we've been trying to look at our future and say, there is a regulatory compliance that we all do. There is a stakeholder compliance. We are a part of a multinational, the Aviva group may want it, UK regulator wants it, India regulator wants it. Let me say the regulators have been very proactive on compliance nowadays. They are very forward looking and future looking. They are willing to change and adapt. So that's a big compliment and a big asset. The other thing is, you look at how do you communicate this message to someone who's on the front line, whether he or she is a call center representative, an agent who talks to the government authorities, who talks to the customer. You ask them to say, put a lens on and say, if it is right for my customers, if it is right for my employees, then it should be right for the organization, and that should be your parameter of a governance mechanism to say, take these two lenses, ask yourself, is it right for the customer? Is it right for my employee to do it? Then go ahead and do it, because then it will automatically be right for the organization. And I think that tone, that culture needs to be set at the top and then communicated. And that is not the responsibility of either the HR head or the compliance head or the risk head. I think that starts at the group exec, the India exec level or the exec level, and say, that's how you have to embody. I think that's where the future comes.
Okay, just one sentence each from Mr. Jha and also from Mr. Madhavan. We have dwarfish leadership, we have culture. One thing from you with regard to leadership, governance, management debate. One sentence, couple of sentences. I've just been knocked over.
Yeah, Professor Verma, if I may quickly build on, sorry, Priyaranjan. on what just Amit mentioned. So we also operate in a very highly regulated industry, medical devices for all good reasons. We do have very clear statutory, goes and no goes, and which is, black and white. But having said that, building on to what Amit just mentioned, there is still a big gray zone, right? There is still a big gray zone, and it depends on the leadership and culture that you said on how you tackle it. So one thing is open, transparent communication, debate on those gray zones. There is nothing gray. If you really look hard, it is a tad shade black or white, right? If you look at it from a very distance, everything looks gray to you. Even the black and white look gray from a very large distance. But the encouragement to talk things in the open and transparent manner, and it's not about what the leader wants. The executive powers, executive decision is all good in good time, and I'm not a very big believer in democracy. However, there are certain aspects, and especially around governance, where you're just one of the 5 or 10 people in the group or in the room who are debating things out, and you're trying to reach a conclusion. I think that is extremely essential. And on the backdrop of the pandemic, there are a lot of things we're trying to do innovatively, right, for growing the business or for bringing in technology. And sometimes, when you're only looking at growth, there have been instances where governance goes for a toss, and we have read umpteen case studies on that, right? So while we are adapting to the change, while we are looking at newer ways of doing what we're supposed to do, how do you not let go of that culture of open, transparent debate on anything that can be questioned? Okay, and I strongly believe there is nothing gray. You really need to call it out whether it is black or white. The minute you are comfortable in the gray zone, and very dangerously so, that's the message then you're sending to the last rep on the field who actually meets the customer, right? I'm in Delhi, I still go meet quite a bunch of customers, but that person does it every day in and day out. I think that communication should be very clearly set from the top. And if you are in doubt, you ask. Don't make an assumption, don't do something silly and then say that I did it for the organization. Absolutely not. So probably zero tolerance on there. Might sound a little hard there, but it's the culture of, hey, let's talk it out. Let's figure out whether we can do it or not and then move ahead. So I'll stop there, Professor Verma.
Yeah, Mr. Jha, last word from you.
Yeah, so Manoj, you mentioned democracy. So I think there is a dramatic democratization of power structures that has happened. Now the employees decide where they want to work from, when they want to work, what do they want to contribute, which company do they want to work. So in a situation like that, we don't any longer have one office. We have multitude of offices. The InfoSec implication, the governance implication, compliance implication is totally different today than it was a few years back. And in a situation like that, trust is the new currency. If you can't trust, it won't work, period. And that's where the culture of compliance comes in. That everyone believes in compliance, everyone lives compliance, and in case of exceptions, you really crack down like a ton of bricks.
That's wonderful. I mean, listening to all of you, top leadership, I would say democracy. You're talking in terms of processes and culture. I think very happy to listen to all of you. I'm sure all of you must have really feel delighted that our Indian industry is in very good hands, and the next gen is going to lead us to a great amount of success.